chapter 37. We're going to look at a warning given to Ezekiel in a vision. It's Ezekiel 37. We're going to look at the first 14 verses. And in this vision, Ezekiel, he's taken to this huge valley plain, and in this valley plain is filled with thousands and thousands of human bones, and he's placed in the middle of them. And what do these bones represent? If you look over to verse 11, it says, in the middle of it says, these bones are the whole house of Israel. So while Ezekiel's sitting in these bones, he suddenly hears this rattling sound, and these bones start to move. They start to grow tendons, then flesh, and then skin. They start to come to life, and they get up and they become this mighty army. Now we know this prophecy initially referred to ancient Israel going into captivity to Babylon, and then eventually restored to their homeland in Israel to restore pure worship. But are we talking about Israel or Babylon here? No, we're talking about Babylon the Great. So we have a larger fulfillment here in this prophecy. And the ones who are going to encounter this captivity are called, from Galatians 6:16, the Israel of God. And these are spirit anointed ones. And so but what does this prophecy have anything to do with the length of time that God's people were in held captivity to Babylon the Great? Well, if you look at the screens, you will notice in the first is a blue highlighted section, and above that it says that Jesus and his disciples were giving warnings. So similar to Ezekiel, they were giving warnings about this great apostasy that was going to develop from within the congregation, and then that was going to kick off this captivity. And so we know this apostasy started at the death of the last apostles. The Bible says this occurred in the 2nd century. So once they died off, pure worship died, and God's people were thrown in captivity to false worship, Babylon the Great, for the next 1,800 years. And what a fitting way to put this. Ezekiel says here in verse 2, he says, and I saw that there were very many bones lying in the valley plain, and they were very dry. So if you see how notice he said they were very dry. By him saying they were very dry, he tells us that these bones must have been sitting here for quite some time, laying dead. And during these period of times in captivity, these are very dark, hard days, and we know that false teachings and practices infiltrated the church, and the church joined forces with the state. And if you didn't convert to Catholicism, you were put to death, weren't you? And many were. And so we also know that the Bible was hidden, and only the clergy class were able to obtain a Bible during this time period. And so, was this going to last? Was this going to last long? Not at all. As Ezekiel, he continued to see these bones, and eventually, if you look in the, eventually he heard this sound. It was this rattling sound, if you remember. And right when this rattling sound happened, a restoration started. And so if you look in the 1500s, and we know back in the 1500s, what was this rattling sound? Well, we know a few group of men challenged the church. They challenged their teachings. They started to translate the Bible in the common language, and a lot of them were put to death for this. And so, also, if we remember, we learned about the printing press being developed during this time, and this also sped up that translation process. So now you got the Bible in the hands of many people, and they're starting to question the church's teachings, and now you can see the church starting to lose its grip in a way. So here comes the 1800s, and these skeletons start to come alive. We know in the 1800s, Russell and his associates started doing a deep study of the Bible, and they started to expose these teachings, such as the Trinity and hellfire, and Zion's Watchtower comes about, the photodrome of creation, and it was as like Ezekiel puts it here in verse 6, how this flesh and the skin starts to envelop these spiritual skeletons, and they start to come to life, don't they? And so as they continue to come to life, 1919 comes about, the faithful and discreet slave is installed, pure worship is brought back to life, and here we are now, from a small one into a mighty nation, or like Ezekiel puts it here in verse 10, in the middle of verse 10, he says, "And they began to live and to stand on their feet, an extremely large army." So the evidence, brothers and sisters, tells us this captivity started in the 2nd century and ended in 1919.